there's nothing wrong with having an exit, but there's also nothing wrong with setting up your business in a way so that you could step out of it and have other people operate it.
Climbing up, there's a struggle, tension in the air. But the underdog prevails, we here to declare. To the top of the mountain where champions stand. Failures can't break us, we taking command. Yeah, it's a journey, climb to the peak. Scaling businesses, who it ain't for the weak. Growth is the game, we play it real tall. From the bottom to the summit, we rise, never fall. Interview the legends, success stories told. Risepreneurs, hearts made of gold. Strategies unfold, in the struggle grace. Hardship and challenges, yeah, we still embrace.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Risepreneur podcast, a show dedicated to all the business owners, entrepreneurs who's looking to grow, scale their businesses to ultimately exit at the highest valuation. Today, we have a special guest, and you'll see why shortly. His name is Kurt Uhlir. It's a wow. He's an inventor, serial entrepreneur, a speaker, coach, mentor. Sky's the limit, what he went through. I would love to pick his brain on today's podcast and see how we entrepreneurs can benefit from his experience and knowledge that he had. Kurt, why don't you introduce yourself a little more?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. It's been an honor to be a guest. So yeah, I've been both a serial and parallel entrepreneur, and now I tend to label myself as a scaler. I still sometimes start things as side hustles. I've done some of those that have had good 7-figure exits, but I did start as an entrepreneur. So I started 2 LLCs when I was 14. One of those I ended up selling when I went to college, and the other one became an e-commerce store and a series of retail stores for a while. But I really found my way into technology, and I've been part of some really big companies. I've been part of more than 60 M&A and investment transactions in my career, and some of those have gone very well, some have not. But I view myself as a scaler now, and I've also lived that path where I think we may talk about it, where making a lot of money is great, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a home life, if your employees don't have a home life that's all that they feel good about as well, nobody's going to feel like they have success.
Awesome. All right, so let's go to the beginning. I want to dive into your childhood just to understand the mindset and what the makeup is that gave birth to your perspective and the actions that you took later in life. You said that at early age, your parents worked really hard, and you mentioned that your father worked late nights, and you've been awakened at 4 in the morning for different projects, activities. Can you elaborate what exactly that your father was doing that he would involve you?
Much of my dad's side of the family has been blessed with DNA where they don't need to sleep a good bit. So my dad would sleep about an hour and a half to 2 hours a night until his third round of cancer, at which point he started sleeping a little bit more like a mere. He started sleeping then more like a mere mortal. And so he always had at least one full-time job and sometimes would have two. But when you don't think about it, if you only sleep an hour and a half to 2 hours a night, that means that you're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody else is. And so I don't know if it's some of my own DNA from him or just conditioned to it. But I remember being, young, 6, 7, 8 years old, and he would wake me up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning and be like, "Hey, let's go on a field trip." And then you also think about what's open at 3 o'clock in the morning in like a southwest suburb of Chicago. And so not a lot of things that are great. Sometimes there was something like a Waffle House, but because he had connections through both work and things like the Masonic Lodge, we did weird things. Like we would get let into museums at 3 o'clock in the morning. I toured the Cook County morgue. I remember I was probably 7 or 8 because he had a lodge connection into the Masonic Lodge into the morgue. Who takes their 7 or 8 year olds to the morgue? But it's one of those things I look back now and I've had just such diverse kind of experiences because he told me later, he said, I was trying to intentionally make sure that you got to experience many different things so you could figure out what life would look like for you.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Because I would, when I saw that you mentioned that your parents worked really hard, I was thinking that my parents as well. So what's the difference, right? I remember my father constantly reminding us that at your childhood, I made you focus on your education. I did not trouble you. I had to go grind. There were 5 of us, right? 5 siblings. So my father did everything possible not to engage us into his worlds. So he's a baby boomer, right? So we would go and pursue education. even though in the former USSR, education had no value anymore because everything was through bribery, right? You want to be a doctor, how much do you have? That's how it was. So your father was intentionally creating memories, having you experience all those things at early age, so you would ultimately get to that point thinking, okay, the possibilities are endless. So that had the biggest impact on how you proceeded forward because
That had
later
a
on.
huge impact for sure. Parallel to that, my mom was the daughter of a farmer in North Alabama. And so she had the work ethic. My dad was the innovator, they were the intellectuals. And so I really valued education. My mom was the hard worker, and I'd say still outwork would have outworked me, anything that I look at today. And my dad's sister, my aunt, did not have kids. And so she adopted me. And I didn't know it at the time, but she spent a ton of time. In addition to what I mentioned about my dad, my aunt was making sure that she would get me 3 to 4 days a week after school and then sometimes take me out on the weekends, and she was at the time, I didn't know it, but she said she was teaching me skills for life. What do you want to do when you're 8 years old, 10-year-old? I had no idea. She said, look, you were scared. You were a scared little kid that didn't have any real confidence. And so she had ridden horses earlier in her life. She bought a horse specifically to start training me with horses and making me do things at like 8 years old, walk around the back of the horse. Now I love horses. She did that, and she'd take me to museums. She goes, look, I was trying to invest in you the same way my dad was, to teach me skills that I would benefit me later in life.
Wow. And look at the cause and effect, right?
Yep.
What a lesson here. Right now, I see even myself, I go back in time. I was a web developer. I only realized that I have kids when I had three kids. I was working day and night trying to code. And then one day I woke up and said, wait a second, I can't work like this anymore. I cannot keep up. I reached the ceiling. I have three kids. I'm not spending time with them because it was not productive time in terms of a career. So, how many entrepreneurs right now focusing on their business, trying to make their ends meet, trying to grow, only at the expense of neglecting the family, the whole reason why we go to work, right? For our future generation to take over by constantly working, not allowing kids experience what you have experienced and relying on the iPads and tablets and social media impact and experience life through virtual world, right? That not necessarily a real world thing. So growing up not so competent. So with that, of course, you went to in school. You started the landscaping business, right, at the
Mhm.
age of 13.
Yep.
So my question here is: late in high school, you said you've been already building websites, offering that as a service and web hosting. How you did not get carried away with entrepreneurship and still seen a value in our education system?
Now, I would say now I'm actually fairly negative on a lot of the formal education system, because you can learn so much more, I think, even for the last 10 or 15 years. And I love a lot of the liberal arts from a personal learning perspective, but that's much different than learning hard sciences or coding or software. That's a good question. I think I just felt this push really about, there was a checklist in my mind that I wouldn't say was accurate, but I thought that there are certain things you needed to do to be successful as an adult. You needed to go to school. You probably need to have a master's degree as well. You needed to get married. And I made a lot of bad decisions because of what I thought you needed to do to be successful. And as opposed to, I remember I came back for, I'd been out of my master's for a while, had been working at a company we'd taken global. And I ran into a friend that was a year younger than me in high school. And he wasn't even like the manager or operator at Jiffy Lube, an oil change place. And he should be the guidance counselor at every school, because here I am thinking I've done this checklist of things. And because to me, I didn't choose the entrepreneurial path because I thought you needed to be a corporate executive. And so I was on that path. And he looks at me and says, what's your day look like? They're actually changing my oil. I'm back in North Alabama. And I'm like, I work 12 to 16 hours a day, but I'm on a sometimes that's on a plane to Paris and here and there. And he's like, do you have student debt? Yeah, I've got a lot of student debt. And he's like, how much? I'm like, probably 100 grand or more at this point. He's my life's like, Kurt. I said, what? And so he goes, I graduated high school and I got a job the first year in the basically in the hole there, changing oil, earned like 50 grand a year, 40 grand a year. So he was like, so the 4 years you were in school, I earned 200 grand in those years. And then you were in school for another year, you're racking up debt. He's like, you know what? When I got married before you were out of school, I've got littles at home. When I think about at the end of the day, I think about going home and spending time with my wife. And so he lays out what to me hits me as just reality is I'm thinking success is everything I've been doing. And he's pointing at a life where he's been working, he has a family, he has a kid. He's the only stress he has is does his wife and him go on a date on the weekend or not? And I'd like to buy this, but I can't. As the other hand, I'm sitting with so much money around me, but I don't have time to use it. And I'm like, what I thought was success, his view is much better for success. I'm like, why don't people tell this to like junior high and high schoolers?
Wow. There's so much loaded in there. As a father, as a husband, as a business owner, as myself as well, thinking about that work life balance. And sometimes we have to choose and sacrifices we make. I remember sitting down and reflecting and actually intentionally saying to myself, you know what? I see myself down the road, and my kids would challenge me on certain things that I chose to do. I would be okay with them challenging what I did.
Right.
And I'm not going to regret because that's what I believe is required to sacrifice. And as a to basically, you're not getting that relationship necessarily. And a lot of entrepreneurs, I believe, can relate to that because we're working all the time, right? Even when we're at home, even on a day off, the mind is racing. You're learning from everything. Once you that have that entrepreneurial mindset, you learning life through everything. And it's like all goes back ultimately back to work, back to career, back to climbing that ladder of success.
For me, there's with what you said there, I would agree with all of that. You asked about why I didn't take the entrepreneurial path because I thought there was a different path that I needed to take. But I think that's the same thing. Even if I had chosen the entrepreneurial path, I coach a lot of people that are solo entrepreneurs or that have 10, 15 people working for them at a small business that are trying to scale. And I think that it's just as I had hidden false assumptions or hidden assumptions where this is what you need to be successful. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you mentioned like you will help talk to people about how to have a better exit. There's nothing wrong with having an exit, but there's also nothing wrong with setting up your business in a way so that you could step out of it and have other people operate it and that's puts it in a good place for an exit. But it also, if you had a business that was just throwing off 200,000 or $700,000 a year of cash flow back to you, do you need an exit? No. But so many people, they don't think about their business that way and they go, I have to have an exit to be successful. Later in life, I thought I needed to be a founder of a SaaS technology company. I was just speaking to somebody who's raised a bunch of money in Silicon Valley. And she's like, why you started a company? Why are you wanting to like, why are you looking at other things now? I'm like, because that wasn't the life that I wanted, but I thought I needed to be a tech founder. And so an exit is great, but I think the core thing for anybody, you're an entrepreneur, you have more options than what anybody has in the planet. And so it's more of what life do you want? And then build your business to that. And that might be an exit. And instead, it might also be building something that just throws off cash flow and you can still take the weekend off or a Wednesday if you want to.
Amazing. Again, so much is racing through my head as you're saying this is unfortunately nobody knows life, right? It's not something that you'll read in book and say, okay, that's a blueprint for me that everything is according to the plan. We come up with ideas that sometime in the future, if I achieve that, if I become that, then I'll be happy. And there we are, like juggling, get to that place where it takes a week, a year, 10 years. Once you get it, you look back and say, wait a second, that's still something empty, still something is not there. And then you find a new pursuit, a new pursuit. Next thing you know, you'll always end up somewhere at the end of your lifetime. Let's go back to when you went to college. Do you think peer pressure from parents gave you that idea, that influenced the idea that this is the path?
I think peer pressure, not pressure from my parents. I might have felt it a little bit from my parents, but it definitely, the reason I know it wasn't from my parents was, um, I had been at Vanderbilt University. I was a college athlete. I'd been there for 3 years, and I came and told my dad right before Christmas that I was going to quit, and he was like, "Okay." And he was completely okay with it and supported it. And it floored me. And he was like, "Look, I dropped out of school and I didn't know a lot of his story there. And he just wanted me to be happy and to pursue things. And he's like, if college is good for you, that's great. If it's not, go do whatever you want." And I was like, I'm going to take 6 months off and rebuild a company my brother and I had started on, an e-commerce company. And he was like, okay. So it definitely wasn't pressure from him to go to school anyway. There was over the top pressure from specifically him my whole life in ways that I hope I do it differently. He would had great intention, but my entire life was always no matter I could literally set new records at a state level for something in school 2 or 3 years in a row. And his response when I would walk off stage with the trophy wasn't good job. Never. It was never I'm proud of you. I remember at some point in 11, this big organization, state organization had literally create an award for me the third time. And what did he say when I went off school? What does every boy or girl want to hear from their parents? I'm proud of you. What does he
Yes.
say instead? I can't wait to see what you do next year.
He would constantly challenge you.
And so if he'd have done that with I'm proud of you, it would have been incredible. But so I had that pressure for him to always perform and do more, but also never know what the finish line was for him being proud of me or feeling loved. And so I hope to draw that. I know his part was right, but the
Yeah.
delivery wasn't necessarily.
Yeah.
And so I had that pressure. And while I didn't have the pressure to go to school, I had the pressure to perform.
I can totally relate. My relationship with my father is exactly the same. It was never because he was constantly working and distant from the family, right? We were automatically closer with my mom. He would never tell anyone that he's proud of us or of our achievements, not even one on one and not even in front of people. So we always felt that I got to step up, I got to do more, I got to do more. I also know a lot of individuals that actually break and not able to continue because no matter what I do, I'm never good enough and they can never satisfy you. So why even try? Right. So unfortunately, that happens as well. So, what happened to your businesses that you started while you were in high school? Then you said you started something with your brother. Ultimately, you started to climb the corporate ladder. Where did you exit those? Did you let it run?
I
What happened?
exited the landscaping business. I was planning on shutting it down because when you're in your teens and you have a small company, you have no idea that there's any opportunity. Heck, a lot of entrepreneurs have no idea. I talk to people that are. I love talking to people that are several seasons ahead of me in business and life, and so I'll talk to a CPA or a lawyer, and I ask, "What did you used to do?" Because they've been retired for 10 years or 15 years, and it's basically I shut down my accounting practice. I shut down my law firm because most entrepreneurs don't realize that they could exit. So they never build things that way. And I happen to have this old timer in our small town that did know I had more than enough landscaping clients and pressure washing clients that I was employing like a dozen of my friends and one adult full time. And I said I was shutting, he heard somewhere that I was going to shut it down. He was like, why would you shut that down? You can sell revenue. And I was like, can you tell me more about that?
Well,
That sounds like telling me I could fly. I had no idea. And so he gave me enough guidance to have some conversations that I did end up selling that when I went to college. It's for a nice six-figure exit. Didn't do necessarily the wise things with the money, but I had a nice six-figure exit. And then the one I started with my brother did run for quite a number of years with it being the company being his full-time job. And then it slowly petered out.
interesting. Learning second thing here is one is the experiences that your father and your aunt made you go through opened up the possibilities in your mind. At the same time, only recently I started to pursue merger acquisitions world. And before somehow I thought any company you have, it's usually two, three multiples. That's what you're getting. Only to find out later that wait a second, it all depends on where you're holding it company, how big is the company, and who you're selling it to. So there's so much more that could be done with the capitalization of the company when you grow it and selling it at above and beyond the two, three multiples. You got that exposure when you were in college, when
Mhm.
you were exiting your landscaping business. So that's another probably major light bulb moment of actually exiting something, not just shutting it down. I believe still it is a major success, even if it was a six figure. It's a wow.
I mean,
So
six figures when you're 19 is still an
yes,
incredible amount of money.
yes, it is. And that, by the way, what year were you born?
I was born in 76.
Same here, dragon, the year of the dragon. That's our year today. Interesting. Okay, next question would be, okay, I'm in a business. You were running it since being so young. How did you identify it's time to delegate? And this is who I'm going to delegate it to, and this is how I'm going to make sure that it's done correctly. Because most of the entrepreneurs, as we spoke earlier, reach that place where I grew my business. I know I can bring more business in. My team cannot handle it. If I bring it, quality will suffer. I'm already experiencing turnover. I cannot retain talent, or if barely managing who I have right now, bringing somebody else, that means giving away my time from weekends and away from my family even more. So they reach that plateau. How do you break through that, in your
Yeah,
opinion?
great question. I did not break through that when I was young. I didn't even break through that when I was in the corporate world. But I look back and so I've shifted my leadership style in the corporate world. I've also done that on some companies that I've built on the side that have been sold. And I coach a lot of people on this. From my experience, like you can get to a certain growth level, basically micromanaging everything. And so what I think is very helpful for people to have a mind shift change is like we complicate things from a leadership perspective. And to your point about like bringing somebody on and go, whether you're with your kids or you're hiring employees or you work for somebody right now and you're doing a side hustle, there's really only two leadership styles. There's an authoritative leadership style, which underlying it, no matter if you're a nice person or not, says, do what I say, how I say it, the way I told you in the time frame where I'm going to fire you. Or there's another side, which is a servant leadership style, which says, look, if I'm wanting to your point about wanting to delegate, it's a mind shift change and also the permission you give to the people you hire. There are things that are repeatable in business, and you want to try to get as many of those. But the moment you hire somebody for a repeatable business or for something that's a little bit more innovative, you're hiring them not to do a job. You're hiring them to reach a business outcome. So the moment I do that, like, even if I'm the most skilled web developer, the moment I hire a new designer, a new coder, even if I could do the job better than them, unless I'm actually going to do the work, so why should I hire somebody? I have to empower those people and show up every day and say, how do I help this man or woman do their job designing logos, coding, selling, calling clients for support? How do I help this? How do I serve them to reach the business outcome I actually hired them to do? There's a big overlap there when you have one, two, or three employees. But the moment you start getting more than two or three employees, you're not doing any part of their job. And so the way you get into delegating is to start saying, look, I didn't hire you to answer phones. I didn't hire you to do creative work. I hired you to make the clients happy and do this piece of it. And the client pays for money when they're happy. So maybe I hired the person to do creative design work. But when I explain to them the business outcomes that I'm trying to reach, and I say, look, I'm telling you what I want you to do, but ultimately I want you to help me hit the business outcomes. So if I tell you to do something that's you think is opposite of the direction of hitting our business outcomes, you have permission to tell me that and to push back and go, well, you're telling me that these three things are the most important things I should spend my time on, but you keep giving me these side projects and it's taking up 50% of my time. It's not driving any revenue. From a delegation perspective, if you're micromanaging everything, then you have to be right all the time. If you're treating them as you're trying to serve those people, you're giving them permission to say, you're giving me conflicting stuff here. And at which point they help you delegate. They help you make better decisions. They help you realize, hey, this idea that you have, it might not be a good idea, or this idea you said is a crazy idea. Can we actually double down on that and experiment a little bit more? And so I find the best way to hand things off is to try to make things as repeatable as possible and then be clear on that. But even there, tell people, I want you to do this process, but this is the outcome I want. So if there's anything I ever tell you to do or don't tell you to do, you see me doing that you could do better because that's the outcome I want. I need you to bring it to my attention and then just come back and reinforce that message with them to the point that you have to tell that to your employees so frequently that your spouse is annoyed with hearing it on the phone because you're telling your employees it that much.
Wow. Another major lesson. I'm connecting it to something that recently my mentor opened to me. Question I asked him, I'm not a dominant personality. I'm coming more from the integrator side.
Yeah.
I'm detailed. I cannot pressure people to do stuff. I want to show them why and let them go with it. So, what he brought to my attention is you can steal that persona, just introduce two things, right? So, he said, focus on the goal. And the second thing you should do is focus on the speed,
Yeah.
how fast you can get to that goal. And you're now telling me exactly that. When you were describing this, I see how our current setup of education is still carrying things from the days of manufacturing where people had to be the best followers, right? Right now, most of the individuals condition just to follow instructions. So I'm hiring you as a designer, I'm hiring you to perform certain tasks. This is not the focus. Like you said, right now, focus is that goal. This is the outcome. These are the key things that we need to achieve to keep our clients satisfied. I let you run with it. I'll support you. I'll provide you the playground for you to grow to achieve that. And you're basically going to own it. So you're giving them opportunity to run with it and not be the bottleneck, not be the one that would be the go-to resource to figure out how.
Yeah, I find the best leaders are also the best followers as well. Sometimes my team might have a better idea than I do, but to grow on things, like I can learn from everybody. I'm keenly aware of there's probably 30 things I'm wrong about in my business right now, and I have no idea about it. And it's because when I look back historically, corporate worlds, running fractional CMO, where heck, even things with my wife, I look at things and it's like, how often does something major come up? And you look back at something you've been doing for the last 2 years with your company. And at the time you thought it was a good decision. And the whole time, last 2 years, you thought it was a good decision. And something happens now and you go, wow, that's a bad decision. And we discount it and saying it's hindsight. And I didn't know all that then. But actually, there's usually a ton of signposts along the way that tell you, hey, this was wrong. And you distract it. You said you're going so fast and you pay attention to it, especially if you have a team and you point out to people that says, I might be wrong about something. And you come back and you tell them when these things do come up that you were wrong about, then they don't feel bad about bringing up, hey, did you see that sign that said you might be wrong about this thing we're doing? Because you're admitting to them that you've been wrong before, that you maybe just discovered you were wrong about something. What happens is you create a culture that a decision that otherwise would have taken 2 years for you to figure out was wrong in your business, because you enable and you empower your teams to have a safe environment and point out these little things. They might not be able to articulate it. You give them power to say, I have this gut feeling that you shouldn't be doing this when you're selling websites, as an example. What happens is, instead of finding out in 2 years, you end up finding out in 6 months that you were wrong. Imagine what that looks like for a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year career. If everything that would have taken 2 years, instead, you find out in 6 months that you were wrong. You get through 80 years of being wrong and finding right that much faster in 20 years. Wow, that just fundamentally changes your business, your career. It changes things at home when you point out stuff with your kids and your wife and you go, look, I think I'm right, but what could I be wrong about? And then your kids also feel like more comfortable coming to you with those things.
Wow. So basically, a culture where it's okay to make a mistake because we find out the truth much quicker. And from there, we can have a better foundation to keep on growing.
Absolutely. And when you hire people, it's a mentality. It is a mind shift as a leader. You have to enforce ad nauseum, but it also matters in who you hire. So many entrepreneurs, they want, especially early hires, they hire people and they say they're hiring for culture, which either means they're hiring somebody that they think is just going to hustle really hard, which isn't always the best person, but it could be. Or if you really dig down and you ask them, what do you mean by you're hiring somebody for culture? What they mean is they're hiring somebody that they would be friends with. And I'm like, that's not a good company culture. I'm not hiring a family into my business. I'm hiring a professional sports team. And that's from somebody who doesn't really like sports, but I'm hiring athletes to do certain jobs. I don't want to win a game. I want to build a legacy that people go, for 20 years, this was University of Alabama in football. To do that, you're going to hire people from culture that you would see in their actions at their last couple of jobs. Do they have a bias towards action? When something's wrong, do they just jump in and want to fix it, whether it's their job or not? Do they have really strong opinions, but they're also to go, hey, I might be wrong, so I'm going to hold it loosely. And because you should show up that way too. And do they approach healthy conflict within that personality? Do they go, some cases, like I had a boss, he was brilliant. And in person, I could challenge him as hard as I possibly could on anything in person, on our one on one. But in the group setting, I didn't even dabble on pushing back on anything because that was his personality. So I knew, and he helped direct me in this, that from a healthy conflict perspective, come to me when you think I'm even vaguely wrong about something. But basically, don't ever tell me that in front of anybody else. So I shifted how to make sure we were healthy. We didn't just have conflict. You would see those things in actions in people.
Interesting. So basically, the ego comes into play, connects to both of these things that you just mentioned, that finding out something much earlier than later in life in the process. And in here as well is communicating in such a way that you're not stepping on somebody's ego, not embarrassing somebody in public, creates that healthy environment. Right. What I'm trying to say is it's not easy. It's a mind shift too, right? Because if
Mhm.
you spending time on something, you believe your idea is great or your method is great, and as time progresses, it's so hard to recognize that you were wrong, especially like when you said to go back to your teammates and say, guys, I'm wrong. For the last 5 years or for 5, 10 years, that was the foundation on what I built, and I see that it's so wrong. So people hope and they continue that way, thinking that, you know what, I'm gonna tolerate this, I'm gonna get there. But you also said business is a sport. We're here to win the championship, not just to participate. So a lot of business owners, I think, are finding themselves in a place where they don't want to recognize that flaw. They don't want to communicate it. They don't want to become vulnerable. They want to be that go-to resource for
Mm.
all the solutions. But with that, they slowing down their own growth and what their capacity is holding for them.
Yeah, I think the America especially reinforces this from a culture perspective. If you look at any company that's even like 50 or $100 million more, especially when you look at companies like a Facebook or an IBM or an Apple, anybody that has a C-level title, most people that have an SVP or EVP level title, they have a communication person for them. Has had 5 to 6 communication people that just manage his image, his PR. Now, not that he's not a wonderful person, but what you believe about any book these entrepreneurs wrote, almost all of them have gone through such filtering, and it's not raw to tell you what their real life is. I look at things and be like, look, I'm not worth billions of dollars. I'm not worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've done pretty well. I've also gone near bankrupt as well for things. And so monetarily, I've made an insane amount of money for a lot of people over time. I've also failed so many times that most people just crawl underneath the table and die. I'm going to talk about that. Most people won't. And so because I failed so many times, I've been wrong so many times, I realize that not only maybe whether knowledge wise or experience wise, you may, if you're working for me, you may have, you may be right about something that I'm not, even if you're not, even if you don't have the solution based on your knowledge or your experience, you may just see something that I'm wrong about. So why would I ever show up in a way that's, should I be the authority on some topics, but I'm not the absolute authority because I've been wrong so many times. I have this pile of things in a journal of stuff that just, here's all the crap you've been wrong about, Kurt. So I'm probably wrong about things right now. So I can always learn from somebody. They may even, I said, you may just see something that I don't see. I love it when people have pointed out to me, they have a gut feeling about something and sometimes they have a solution, but usually they don't. And it sparks me to go to my own time or with other leaders in the company. And we think about it. And then we discover that gut feeling is this. And then we come up with a solution for it. We never even would have thought about solving that. But a front desk person at an office, when we used to actually have offices, pointed out something like, oh my gosh, we never would have uncovered this. And it's a $5 million bonus in revenue.
Wow. Amazing. So that intuition, that gut feeling is only coming from us making those mistakes and not just on an individual level, on a collective level. So when you create a culture where it's okay to fail because we learn from that by observing others, you able to actually speed up your learnings and build up that gut feeling to guide you in the right direction. So I think that's like amazing insight they've just said. At the same time, you need to humble yourself to start seeing things that way, because if you the go-to person and full of ego, there's no space for anything else, because everybody just follows to the T everything you say, and there is no room to deviate, possibly make a mistake and learn something from it.
Absolutely. And to your point, you said humble yourself. If you really want this mind shift, you will humble yourself because everything I just said, you will not get right. You will fail on a monthly basis, probably weekly, and maybe daily basis. I have. And so what I think is really helpful is no matter retail company, SaaS-based technology company, you should have a weekly team meeting where you're reviewing again the outcomes you want and what people have actually done, including yourself. What do you do on those meetings? As the leader, I deliberately, because I'm trying to change this culture, I'm some cases I will almost never bring up an example where somebody else was wrong. I'll bring up an example where I was wrong either from the past, and it doesn't happen every week, but especially if it happens something in the either a business decision, or this has happened to me, a relationship decision and how I approach somebody that works for me or on my team. And so I'll ask for permission and go, hey, some of you may have experienced this over the line. One example was I had this gentleman, Alan, that was a peer of mine, and I didn't approach healthy conflict. And like for 2 months, I didn't handle it well. And other people saw it in some meetings. I asked for permission after I finally realized it, and we reconciled. And the next Monday all hands meeting, I brought it up to people. I'm like, I know I've already spoken to a couple of people. 2 or 3 people on this call experienced this. I've already apologized to them for it, but everybody else needs to know this is what's happened over the last 2 months. I didn't get this right with Alan. And this is how I showed up, and this is how it hurt the company. From a mindset perspective, it's brutal. You just want to go lock yourself in a closet afterwards. But what happens from that is people will come to you afterwards and go, "Oh, I think I'm doing that." And then they'll ask for how to handle it. And so you do actually have to humble yourself in front of your team, because they're going to, it's just like raising kids. Your team is going to see your actions. And if your actions don't match with your words, they're not going to get it. But your actions will magnify and amplify. So if you tell people that's the environment you want, they never hear you talk about when you're wrong, they don't believe it. When you actually humble yourself and you bring up where you've been wrong, or there could have been a different approach, or you could have learned something earlier, nobody does that in the corporate world. Nobody does it in the entrepreneurial world. And so they're going to see your action. And so that mind shift will shift. It's good for them, but that's what will shift your mindset. You can say, "Hey, you wanna lead the way that you and I are talking about," and you're gonna get it wrong. If you don't actually come back and do that, humbling yourself in front of your team, your mind shift won't actually change. But you do that at least once a week in those team meetings for a year, you will be a different person next year.
Yeah, awesome. And to add to that, my business mentor, who's running sets of restaurants, has over 10,000 employees. He says that you don't need to focus on everybody. You always focus on your first circle.
Mm.
So when you humble yourself in front of your first circle and make yourself vulnerable, admit that you're human and you also make mistakes, you making the environment friendly to mistakes and calculated mistakes, like risk levels that the people take. And what happens then, it starts to propagate, spill over to their first circle, all the way down to the specialist who's facing the customers and clients. Wow, so many insights. So let's go back. All right, started the business. I understand now that I need to be open to all kinds of experiences,
Mhm.
to have new relationships, new knowledge introduced into my life. Understand that I have a much bigger potential than what I have right now. I humble myself and I realize that I need to delegate. I need to be human. I need to let people make mistakes, take risks. So, how do you now scale the business, right? I'm bringing somebody in. How do I make sure that they follow through? You said focus on a goal, create more or less the framework, the culture, the principles by which they're going to go and try to achieve those goals using the experience they already had. So, how do you keep them accountable? How do you make sure that things actually get done? How do you know how far you can push somebody without overstepping your boundaries and actually breaking in person instead of making them grow?
Yeah, great question. Uh, I don't listen. I think if somebody is asking the questions, how do you keep a hire accountable? It either was not the right hire, or you don't have the right systems in place for them. I like much more creating a transparent environment. And so it's a lot easier in technology than it is in retail or some more blue collar jobs. But from a marketing perspective, from a technology perspective, there are tools like my wife and I literally run our household on Trello. Most of my companies will run on Trello as well. And so I wrote an article for Forbes that talked about an agile and systems mindset. Most marketers will just do their work. But like, how would I know if somebody, especially remote, how do I know if somebody's writing email copies, posting on social media? How much time does it actually take to do keyword research to create content? I'll see the output, but I don't know the effort. If it's in a system like that, like Trello, I'm going to see things moving. I'm going to have content creation is going to have multiple stages. and they can tag me when they want review. Or I would just log in sometimes, even from multiple levels down in the organization, to see how the machine's working. I don't need to be in the factory because that is my dashboard to see what's happening. But it also allows transparency then because everybody on the team, it's different on one hire. The moment you have 5 hires and things are very transparent for what people are doing, if one person isn't pulling their weight, if they're not getting their work done, everybody sees it. If you're reviewing in that weekly meeting, here's what we said we were going to do this week. Here's what each of us actually got accomplished. And let's remember our mission and outcomes. And one person clearly is not getting their work done. Everybody sees it. It's not a one on one conversation. Very often, those people will either ask how they can elevate their work or they will self select out of your company because so often I find the people that don't perform, that do need accountability, like the moment you bring transparency so everybody sees what's being done and we all have different skill levels and different experiences, so we won't all produce the same. But when you bring transparency, the people that aren't cutting their work, aren't getting it done, they're going to self select out of that job pretty quickly.
Agree 100%. I
Yeah,
exactly had these experiences. People either step up or they
or
get
they step
out
out.
themselves. You don't even need to let them go. They just realize this is not the environment for me.
Yeah, and there's been people that either I notice it or they notice it, and so no matter who approaches and says this isn't the right role or right company for you, I've referred those people to other jobs glowingly because there are places that those people work very well. I work a lot in technology. There are software engineers that are really good at pair programming, where there's always 2 or 3 engineers working on the same code base, the same code, sharing screens, and then there's people that aren't good at that. There's some people that have to work that way and can't work independently and can't work remotely. So there may be somebody that doesn't work at all for a SaaS-based technology platform that I'm at today, but they would work very well at IBM and as an established company, as a core programmer there for things. So I'll make those recommendations if they acknowledge who they are as well.
You're amazing. Another eye-opening thing, right? Instead of sending them to competitor, you go work for them, bring them down. You actually seeing the strength of an individual and pushing them towards a place where they can actually grow and produce results instead of just dismissing them from the team.
Yeah, there
That
are toxic things where you have to fire somebody. If there's been a sexual harassment thing, that person needs to go that day. Even then, depending how they approach it, you may still have how do you help that person? But I look at it, if I make you a job offer and you choose to accept it, because no matter what I pay you, if I pay you 100 grand or pay you 200 grand a year, my dollars aren't worth any more than anybody else's dollar. But I also acknowledge, and everybody that's an entrepreneur should do this, when you hire somebody, maybe you don't have a family, so you don't have a family that you're providing for. But the moment you hire somebody and they have a family, you're providing for their household, or you're providing, if they're single, for their own household. So if you've made a bad hire, if they're not a good fit, if you haven't been able to coach them to be successful, if you're not running your business in a way that, like, what happens if you get sick and you don't show up for work and therefore the revenues tank and 20 people are out of work, that's on you. When you think about it that way, I'm not just a provider for my household, I'm the provider for 20
for
households.
everybody.
And so if I've hired you and you've been here for 2, 3, we can coach you out pretty quickly. If you've been here for 6 months, a year or more, that's a joint thing. And at this point, I'm committed at that point is I'm a provider of your family. I also know a lot about you. So I'm hoping we have an environment so that if you just don't like me or I think this isn't the right work for you, if you're open to it, I'll make you an introduction somewhere else because I'm still providing for you until somebody else is able to bring in that household income. That goes back to how do I approach my team? I'm hiring you to reach business outcomes. I also acknowledge that you're not just a cog at the company, you're a whole person. And so I have people on my team, like 2 of the best performers I've ever hired are somebody that in the very short term were very unproductive at times. So one was a mother of a special needs child. And so obviously you're going to have things
Ouch.
that come up and down. And somebody else was on the product side and entered elder care after having worked for us for a number of years. I've been in elder care twice. And when you become the caregiver for somebody who's advanced Alzheimer's, all things change. So if I look at just like a 2 week or 30-day, even 60-day period, both of those individuals probably were some of the least productive people in my teams at the time. If I look at even that year, they were probably the most productive people. if I look at the 2 or 3 years that each of those individuals has worked for me, they were truly in the top 1% of all people
Wow.
I've ever hired around the world. So from a serving perspective, a providing perspective, I want this person to be in my team to help us build a legacy and not just to be successful this year. So that changes the mindset about how do you have conversation and how do they come to you? Because, and I don't always get that as I point out, but I had a woman who worked for me, walked out of the doctor's office knowing that she was going to have a major surgery. I think she called me before she called her dad. And she was in her
Wow.
mid-20s because and she didn't even know what it was gonna look like. She had no dates. She just wanted to say, "This is happening," and but she knew that we were gonna be okay with it, and that we wanted her to be productive over the period and not just, well, if you're out of work for 3 weeks or 6 weeks of medical leave, that happens, but you'll still be one of the best employees I've ever had for the year.
Wow. Goes back to again what's important, right? The culture. You're creating culture where, yes, we're here to win the game, but we're not just all about transactions. There's also a relationship. We understand you're human. For that, I need to know what's going on in your life. So if there's something with the performance, I'm not going to just judge you based on performance itself. I know that there's outside factors that impacting that performance, and come up with the strategy that buy you time, offload some of the things to get you by through this challenge.
Yeah.
Wow,
Well,
that's a wow.
and I know you, I'm sure you have listeners right now that are going, "Yeah, that feels that great, but I need somebody to do the job today where I could just replace this person." And or you push them to you asked earlier about pushing somebody too hard. I'm gonna say, you don't have to care about you don't have to like not everybody in your team is gonna share their personal life. That's okay. Whatever they're willing to share. Here's the thing, you can choose to care or you'll be forced to care. So what happens in that elder care example that I gave where they don't say bringing up to me and either they feel like that they have to take another job to still be able to provide for their family or they don't feel like that they can have that conversation. And so we get into a you're not performing conversation. It becomes very confrontational. You've been forced to care. Or I've been this person before. I used to believe that if one person on the team cried that it was them. If the whole team cried, I just dialed it up a little bit too much. I needed to come back. So there were divorces and breakups and people that weren't married. Well, what do you think happens what do you think happens to the productivity of somebody in your team that's normally a great employee if you provided a work environment that helped add to the thing where they didn't have the margin and they have a failed marriage that happens? Do you think they're productive in the 6 months they're going through that? No, because tell you what, nobody that has kids that goes through a divorce, because nobody gets divorced when they're friends. And so
Yeah.
they have kids in custody and they're figuring you can't have the same wife on 2 households as you can on just 1 household. So what do you think their productivity is then? You've been pushing so much that it might contribute to that. And so you will be forced to care at some point if you don't if you choose not to.
Yeah. Made me think of the attitude, right? The enthusiasm. The enthusiasm can be it's like a balloon that goes up and magnifies everything around you. You're positive, you're productive, things are happening, you're making things happen. But when the attitude is affected, whether by how you perceive yourself, something in the family, something with coworkers, leadership, all that contagious and it starts to spill over into everything you do. And it does affect the performance. Also, probably everyone should be aware that if you miss that opportunity, let that person keep falling down and disconnect. They had such a crazy potential as a peak performer. What it costs to go find somebody else, recruit,
Mhm,
interview, train, get them to this level, hoping that they might be on that caliber and might not have a problem in life, but everybody has problem in life. So if you're transactional, it's just sooner or later you're gonna face it again and again until you learn to
mhm.
be more relational as well. Basically, find a middle road and don't be not no extreme kindness and no extreme strictness. Gotta
Well,
like
yeah.
find
I mean, at the end of the day, I just said I wish I had a better example of it, but it is that professional sports team. It's not a family. We're not just necessarily friends. And it's but do you care if you win a game or do you care if you win this season or just keep winning over and over? And then so it's you get to choose. There are things where like there are times like if you look at in the military, a lot of the most successful people that have been in leadership in the American military have been servant leaders at heart and the people underneath them can come to them and they everybody believes like the colonel cares about us
yeah,
when they're in the battle Does anybody question the kernel?
No,
No, because that's not the time
because they
for it.
know they
And
care.
so that will happen, but that should be the rarity, not the norm.
Yeah. Even you said business as a sport, right? So in sport, sometimes trainer yells at the athlete and calling him out, and he's not offended. He's
Right.
all sweaty and pushing himself to the edge and says, "You know what? You got it. I'm going back in." So
Right.
getting that, because they know that the trainer is really interested for their well-being and for them to win the championship.
Right.
But right now, also our culture in America, I came from socialist country, right? Uh, in America, a lot of individuals buy into the idea that socialism is good. I believe it's actually opposite, that it kills all the peak performers, and the whole concept of having participation trophy, being a finalist, you didn't win, right? So that just go back to the drawing board, go regroup, re-strategize, come up with a better plan, see if you can have another shot. But to be recognized or be offended that you were not recognized as a participant, like we like going down lower, lower, and that it's destroying the entrepreneurship in general, on how we have things. The whole reason why we came to this country for the dream is being stripped away.
Yeah, with the for me, socialism, communism versus the American Democratic Republic, it's like the Olympics. I love the initial procession at the Olympics. So, because at the end of the day, in any race, at a 200-meter sprint, there's a first, second, and third. To your point, but everybody gets acknowledged for making it to the Olympics. Like that's a huge feat. I've been friends with a number of Olympians, so you can be acknowledged for showing up. You can be acknowledged for your job, but at the end of the day, one person won that race and it's not questionable who did. Is it great that the other people were there? Yeah, and they're probably in way better shape than I am personally. But there's a difference between the person that won and the person that did it.
Yeah. And the business, it's, I believe, much more challenging because here you're not leveraging your body alone than your perseverance. Here, the business, it's like more like an intellectual sport. It's more like a chess game to me. You have a chessboard, there's so many possibilities. You must strategize, you must see multiple steps ahead. You must be careful how you do things. It's not always visible to you right away, like you were mentioning before, that you could be making a mistake and by time and you're realizing it 5, 10 years later that you could have went back, but now it's too late, go facing it again. So in the basically the whole idea is you have an opportunity to win, everything is transparent. When it's transparent, you have higher chance and everybody can participate. It doesn't matter. Like in sports, you have men's sport, women's sport, right? And business, it's everybody. So you have a much bigger pool, different minds, and whoever has the most exposed playground has a higher chance of winning. Which brings me to the next question to you: is in your experience, like you mentioned in marketing, how many business owners treat the campaigns, whether it's a person, whether it's a process, as a poker? The keeping things as a black box. Like you wanted to know about efforts, you use a Trello board and you see how everything is. Like I recently was one of the business owners spending over 10,000 a month on the marketing campaign, radio and magazines. How many people saw it? Do not know. How many people call? Do not know. How many walk-ins you got from that? I don't know. How many appointments? I don't know. How many sales? I don't know. So you're just paying over 10,000 each month. You spend over 120K a year without knowing anything. So how do you win at this game if it's no transparency?
That's a great question. For me, there's actually two parts to it. So there's, especially let's stay with the marketing. Most agencies, most marketers, they don't like transparency. If you go look at what they've reported to their boss um, over the last 12 months, it's not going to be consistent things usually. One of the best things about marketing nowadays is I can get metrics for anything. So I could always go cherry pick data that says, hey, I'm being successful. In marketing, I think that it is important to define upfront in every part of your business, but especially in marketing, what are we going to track? In the case of marketing, I want outcomes, but that's a lagging indicator. Instead, what are the leading indicators that will confirm that we're doing things that are going to lead to new potential customers leads and lead to sales? And let's agree up front. And it's important if you're the marketer or if you're the CEO, you want to make sure that conversation's done up front. This happens in product or sales or anything, because if you don't have the conversation up front to define what winning looks like, when the boss, whether that's you or if you have a boss, starts feeling questionable because the outcomes haven't been reached. Any discussion at that point is going to feel defensive. The marketer, if the CEO comes and says, "Hey, where are we at with the outcomes? If you didn't define it up front, even if you're tracking better than you should be, any words out of your mouth are going to feel defensive. And when you don't know it is, you're out of your job." Same thing on the other side. But also winning, there's numbers for the business and there's winning for the individual. And I think that's really important for entrepreneurs as they hire. The business may want outcomes, but like also, why do you as the owner want those outcomes? I don't want the outcomes just because I want more money. My wife and I donate a large amount of money. We also donate our skills and our time. So we know for every extra dollar that we earn, we know how much of a check we can write an impact to somebody for that. And it's life changing money. Well, that's why I work, because we're building that so that we can donate more. If you and I were to get together and we were to go build, let's say, a new application for hiking and outdoors, I bet we're going to hire people that kind of have that same philosophy I just mentioned. They're providing for their family. That's a goal. Or they're providing, we would probably also hire people that really just love the outdoors. And maybe they think the best way that somebody can be peaceful is this app that we're building and selling is going to help people get outdoors. They have a different definition of winning than what I do about wanting to write checks for charity, and different provision than you may want providing for your family. So that's what leadership looks like, is saying, look, we're going to define the business outcomes and what it looks like for the business outcomes. Maybe you open up and share why that's important to you, like I just discussed. But you also have to take the time with each person on the team and figure out, what does winning look like for them? There's nothing wrong with somebody that doesn't care at all about what the company's doing, but winning is providing for this family and they're really good at what they do and they show up every day, because then you can relate to that person to help them remember that they're winning. And that's completely okay that if their outcome is different than what yours looks like, but you have to take the time up front to say, what does life look like that's successful to you? And then let's help make sure we achieve the company's goal by making sure you achieve your personal goals as well.
Interesting. So basically, whether you outsource marketing, because that's what most of the companies do, right? They're really good at the fulfillment. The owner operators usually also are very good at selling because they really know their product service in and out. Marketing is something that let somebody else handle it because I don't have expertise in that. So just like you would create transparency with your teammates, and just like you would find out from your teammates what their goals are and see how you, by working in this company, right at the end of the day, like you said, the business is a vehicle for you to provide to your family, give back as a charity, and so on. So for each teammate, we need to find out what their goal is and how choosing your business as a vehicle would also have them achieve their goal, right? We would do the same thing with the, let's say, marketing agency. We need to find out and communicate what our goals are and find out how are they going to achieve all those goals and what would be as an input output in terms of reporting to understand what's leading and lagging, and if we're okay with those and if we're willing to pay for those. So very critical to set everything up to navigate at much faster pace, right? As speed
Right.
increases and then we all remote, without having this critical data, you're making a decision only to find out later that that was not the right decision. You decided to hire somebody, but in the marketing, there was actually a plateau or opposite. The campaign is negative, and you're bringing all these people in thinking that relying on that data, which was not there or it was not accurate, that create a failure, tremendous failure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for all of that, I agree with all of that. It's those conversations where there's an external marketing agency or somebody that works for you writing code, whatever the roles are. Just agree up front what you're going to look at, month over month, or perhaps week over week. That's going to Things won't always go up and to the right. We wish they would, but they don't. But here's what we're going to look at consistently. That's going to make sure that I believe that you're doing the things that are going to lead us to success down the line. And then I mentioned like that all hands meeting. I love it. Takes a lot of time, but that should be done. And then everybody's numbers, the team's numbers, usually less than the individual, should be shared with everybody else. And it's easier, like when you're building websites, you have different people that may be working different things. When you point out, here's the outcome, a site and a client pays an invoice. But when everybody's seeing the different parts that they're each doing, Now they understand how these systems work together, and they're able to either one, say, "Hey, I'm slowing down on this. So do you have other work you can work on? Because I'm not going to get you that logo and the design work up front." But it also allows them to see how the systems work together. And then that goes back to what we said earlier. When everybody sees the system, they don't have to be experts, but they see how their piece fits in with the system, whether there's 2 employees or 2,000 employees. Now they self feel accountable to the system and other people working.
Yeah. So the reporting transparency becomes a really key, real key, right? I see businesses, some of them focus a lot on the financial matrix. They make their decisions based on that. Some go beyond that and start to produce matrix indicators for the operational side of
Mhm.
things, right? And then very rarely, when you find somebody, what you mentioned, the effort to understand what effort is being put in, both quality and quantity side, to produce those type of outcomes. And another thing is, what are we paying for those outcomes, and what are we getting for those outcomes? It's rare to find, but at the end of the day, it doesn't look so complicated. But somehow nobody wants to take time and actually implement this to make their life much easier. At the end of the day, basically, if you turn on the lights, create that transparency, communication, and everything becomes much easier to strategize, to make decisions. It's a wow.
Yeah, and you mentioned strategize, and so let's stay in the marketing example you brought up. And so with the radio example, I'm a firm believer, and this is happening. If any entrepreneurs are used to spending money in Google Ads, hey, guess what? Cookies are going away, and you need to be having conversations with your external agency about how they're still going to track things for you. But also, here's the hidden thing too: much of what Google gets credit or your external ad agency gets credit for are sales that were going to have happened already. And so I love ads. They're wonderful. But you mentioned like the TV and radio. It's really hard to track that. In any part of your business, don't just necessarily look and define the things that you want to track month over month of things where you can do that last leg of attribution. I think it's really important to think about what does contribution look like. And so I love radio ads in a lot of businesses. It's really hard to get, you're never going to get an attribution of, you may get some people that give you some ideas that this person signed up. We got this customer because of that ad, but you can track it. And there's a lot you can get, and you'll get a feel for your business if you're thinking in terms of contribution. You don't want the person who's taking the ad dollars for the TV ad or radio ad to come back later and try to make you feel good about your money. If you think about it up front, then you're going to feel very confident about, I may not be able to have a firm attribution, but this is how I'm going to know if it's contributing to the business or not. If you have a radio ad that's trying to change the narrative for your business and how people show up to your business, and that's not how people walk in. And if you're a plumbing business, they typically come in for emergencies, but they don't call you just to check for, hey, can you come do a $50 check to see if my system's okay? And you start getting different conversations, you may not be able to track it back to the radio ad, but you can verify if your sales team knows what you're doing, that it's contributing because you've changed the conversation. And so that happens in every part of your business. And so I love marketing because of attribution. I also hate marketing because of attribution. And when you think in terms of contribution, you go, oh, now my business can start to grow.
Yeah. What's interesting, even in this example, every business owner can, like you said, you got to come up with something that would satisfy you. So I want to know at least something. So
Mhm.
what one example that comes to mind, why not allocate a specific phone number to that specific station, to that specific offer? So if anything comes that, or either or narrative or somebody would mention something from that offer, and okay, that's what's working. That's where we got it from. So from the get-go, initiate something that would position things to your satisfaction. So then at least what to expect and decide based on that. Another thought that came to mind is how interesting when we go to a supermarket and we buy something. Let's say I'm buying a dozen of eggs. I'm giving $5, let's say, and I'm getting dozen of eggs. I know exactly what I gave and exactly what I got. So somehow in a business world, when we hire, let's say, an agency, we hire somebody on the fulfillment side, we hire somebody on operation side, we do not always know what we get. We know exactly what we give. I know I'm paying you 50K a year. If I break it down by business days, I know exactly what I'm paying you per day. but I have no idea in terms of effort what was done on that day,
Right.
what type of outcome was produced on that day, how much money that outcome brought. We do not really go to that level of transparency to see that these efforts paying off or not, right? What am I working on? So just again, just an observation, something also that I recently realized it was a wow for me. So one more thing I want to touch on, if you don't mind, when you said giving back, I was reading on your bio that there was my understanding was that came to a certain point in life where you said all this is empty. There's so much more, right? Where you shifted. What came to mind basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We going up, family sustained, everything is good. An achiever. Everything for me is it's happening there, but it's still somehow not fulfilling. How did you come to the idea of giving back? And can you bring us to that moment?
For me, I had 3 major things that kinda happened all in my life. 2 of them one work-wise, 2 personal. They happened all together in 5 days and just completely broke me mentally, spiritually, not necessarily financially, although one did end up that direction. And it caused me to go to my mentor at the time and ask, "These things happen," and I tried telling some what I thought were friends. I tried telling some people at work what was going on, and nobody cared. So I went to my mentor and I'm like, told him these are very intimate things. I told him what happened. And I was like, why don't people care? And he's like, because you're an asshole. And I'm like, what? And he's, you're an asshole. Like, why would anybody care about you? And he just gives me all this truth. And so I think you always have to give grace and truth together. And he was much more on the truth side than the grace side at that time. And I hung up the phone and I called my mom. I didn't talk to my mom about things like that. My mom was this person that would, no matter what happened in the family, no matter how wrong you were, if anybody else was confronting you about something, she always took your side to defend you. And I told her, I'm like, this is what Don just told me. And I'm like, I don't understand. And what I was wanting was for her to tell me that's not true because that's what her job was, I thought. And she was like, no, you are an asshole. And so that's like a sword through my heart because I've never heard feedback like that from my mom. And I'm like, you would never tell me this. Like, why? And why would you tell me this now? You never would have heard it before, but you
Be
asked. So
ready.
I thought I'd give you the real thing. And so that caused me to realize I hit it. I really realized it first financially, especially at work. Like I even discounted the personal stuff. I had made people millionaires and they didn't care about the work loss. They didn't care about the personal stuff that was going on. And I'm like, I thought I paid you to care basically. And so that started very
Wow.
quickly for me. In my case, I had a spiritual awakening. I came to Jesus during that time. That's not always the path for everyone, but I realized very much in my leadership style, I had been treating people disposable. I had been treating the people at work as if they were no different than a laptop or a backpack or something like that. And I came to servant leadership for a couple reasons. One is morally, I did think it was the right way to treat people. And I started to think, and I think a lot of people from different faiths will come to servant leadership for that. But when I really took the time to think about it from a dollar's perspective, all the things you and I have spoken about I might be wrong and how many times I have been wrong and how many times I fired somebody because they had something going on in personal life and I didn't know it. I didn't care. I just, you're fired. I realized how much I had actually failed on the path to hitting financial success because I was being an authoritative asshole. And I was like, so from a moral perspective, these things all happened. And I realized, wow, I should be treating people differently. And if I didn't care about any of that and I looked at it from a monetary perspective only, I went, oh my gosh, our numbers could have been way better if I had treated people differently. And so together, those things all happened within about 6 months by the time I fully processed it. And a lot of time just like staring out the windows, thinking about stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, both from a moral perspective, but especially from a financial numbers perspective, there is a better way to lead people. And so I think it has a bigger dollar impact at the companies I'm at today because they have 10 million, 20 million, $200 million of sales. And so when you shift that mentality, dollar wise, it matters a lot more. but I wish I'd have known it when I was starting those early companies because from a percentage growth impact, from a resilience impact, when something like COVID happens or something happens to you, like it would have had a much bigger percentage impact when I was a smaller business, a smaller entrepreneur.
Wow. That's a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine what you went through. Were you still single at that time or you were already married?
I was married. That was one of the things. I found out, among other things, that my wife, that I thought had an affair only once years before, had still been having that same affair for the previous 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
So she ended up choosing a different path, but that was also part of having to think back and look at myself about what part did I have in that.
Wow. Yeah, that's when you found spirituality and started to pursue that.
Yeah, I started trying to understand what authentic relationship looked like with God, but it also just caused me to reexamine so many that and the other things that in my life caused me to reexamine how much have gone on, but also in all aspects. But I think what's important for everybody is like, what's your part in these things? Even in that, you like if you're an entrepreneur and you hire somebody. This happened to my brother. He hired somebody that was a friend that ended up embezzling from him at a company. My brother could have just been mad at the friend and fired them and dealt with that. What did my brother do? He looked back at it and went, I hired them. They made the decision, but I brought them into this company. I gave them this trust. And so it did impact how he chose to hire people and how much trust did he give and trust versus verify and things in the future. He wasn't just mad at the person for their action because he realized ultimately he had a decision in that and part of that as well. And I think that's
Ownership.
the case for all of us, whether it's personal or work. Something bad happens. What you can't control other people, but you can control yourself. What act did you take actions before that if you didn't take, then you have some responsibility in that.
Wow. Again, so much shared. Gotta go and re-listen to that again. So many lessons. So again, just again, thoughts out loud. Without spirituality, you cannot necessarily figure out on your own about the purpose driven leadership, right? So it's because it's all me, climb, not really seeing things around. Great example I comes to mind. I don't know how true it is or not.
Yeah.
Carnegie, right? Anthony Carnegie. He was successful entrepreneur. I was told that he was ruthless, stepped all over to gain. And ultimately, when he realized, he started to build libraries. He built over 2,000 libraries, loaded them with books, tried to get people to understand and realize what it's all about, that it's not just climbing, and some say that it was done for his ego, but more than half of those libraries, I was told that they were not named after him. And the Carnegie Hall in New York, it was built way after his passing, so he got all that honor. So a lot of us, and this is not the first time I hear a similar story, where we try to climb that Maslow's hierarchy without realizing that sooner or later I'm going to connect to my creator. Sooner or later I'm going to see that my life is more than just paying my bills, survive, get by. I'm going to be a purpose driven individual, and tapping into that from the beginning completely changes how you conduct yourself, and don't have to look back and reflect and regret, because that's, I cannot imagine what you went through to come to those. I'm glad that I came through a different path,
Yeah.
but yeah, wow.
Yeah, I agree with you on the path of spirituality. I think the key is, and I think if people do this, it will lead them to spirituality. But I think the key is in finding the purpose, or even just understanding what you're doing today is like, if you look at people that have this almost bumper sticker that says live, love, laugh, or be happy, the question I like to ask is then be happy over what time period? Because being happy in an hour versus a day versus this week, this month, this year, this decade, or 50 years, the action I choose to take next may be very different if I'm looking at being happy over a 50-year time period than if I'm just talking about being happy over a 5-hour time period. And I think the further we look out, it does lead us to our creator, but it also forces you to then have that discussion as well as to say, what do I care about? And so it matters what you do at work. It matters what you show up. I don't always get this right, but it's one of the things is like, what if there was a video camera on me all the time at work? And in the future, my kids could review every decision that I make. If I have to fire
Wow.
somebody, but the camera showed them why I made that decision, would they still go, I'm proud of my dad? That's thinking out some time period. That doesn't actually exist right now, although with AI it might. And there are actually some apps that'll do that. There's an app right now that you can connect everything to, and it will record all of your screens, record all the messages you say, and put together a portfolio of your year. That's scary. Security, as a former
Scary.
security expert, there's no way I'm letting you record my screen all the time. But the concept, like that could actually happen. But the point is thinking further out is going to take you to what's really important to you and what's really consequential in what time frame. And the other day, like all I'm trying to do is multiply myself.
Wow. Amazing, Kurt. I wish we had more time and keep on going. There's so much more to discuss. So let's stop here. But before we do, I would love you to share with the audience how they can find you. We're gonna also put the links at the in the description of this video podcast and share with others. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So if you want business tips and things about growing both your business and or personally, follow me on LinkedIn. I share much more bite-sized kind of snippets there. If you wanted more of a look into my personal life, and it'll take you Instagram or anywhere else, go to my personal website at kurtuhlir.com. I also write about a lot of these topics. And if I haven't written about something related to growing your business, ask in a comment, and I will almost guarantee I will put my thoughts down in an article for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kurt. I wish you lots of blessings and you should make a lot more impact than where you are right now.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All the best.